People have been making things for thousands of years.
It's a very shifting time at the moment.
We are talking about the definition of what a sculpture is.
Sculpture has this rather odd status, I think.
What's incredible about the Nasher Prize is that it gets together a series of curators, intellectuals, and art thinkers.
They not only know this change, but also a part of this driving forces of this change.
Sculpture is in a lively place and a place of experimentation and pushing the boundaries.
There are artists now who are making very powerful objects, but that those objects often have a resonance, a meaning, and a connection with the world way beyond the art world.
Why sculpture now?
I think the relationship between photography and sculpture.
Porque en nuestro mundo contemporáneo,
artists cannot represent reality. We represent and create a new reality.
We can decode for a larger public so that the larger public sort of understands why this is such a powerful object that needs to be addressed.
If we take our collective imaginations into the future, if we start thinking now like, yo, we can do anything.
Sculpture has this capacity of absorbing everything that surrounds it. The attractiveness of sculpture is in its facility to be both open-ended and at the same time mysterious.
Walk with me. Oh, please walk. Walk with me. Oh, please.
Chicago's, not only am I from here, it had the right preconditions where I might be productive. I often attribute my hands to my dad. He was a builder and I had to build. I wasn't very good at it, but I was actively building, working on his buildings and rehabbing apartments and working on the roof. What made me good in the clay studio was the fact that I already had my dad's hands and my mom's care, And I think over time, I just tried to cultivate understanding the histories of making and material culture and art, but also just keeping my hands busy and keeping them in clay and touching things.
Theaster makes sculpture through the encounter of materials, memories, found materials, and people.
Theaster Gates is an artist who's been committed to working in the neighborhood in which he lives, on the south side of Chicago, and taking buildings that were disused or abandoned and renovating them and giving them new uses.
If we were to break down a building into a series of spaces that have raw materials that need fashioning, that's gonna make a person feel a certain way, one space to the next, then building making is no different from ceramic object making, is no different from metalsmithing is no different from shoemaking.
Theaster's work makes us consider objects and places that were not considered to have value as having value. A lot of Theaster's artistic practice is thinking about space. And very specifically, it is in thinking about what is the potential of Black space. How is it defined? What are the qualities that make a space inherently and intrinsically Black?
So I collect a lot of things. And some of those things will never become works of art. They're just things. And those things are stored and they're numbered.
The line between collecting and hoarding is a fine one when it comes to Theaster. It isn't simply, books, records, negrobilia, but machine parts, old timber, flotsam and jetsam of all sorts. Theaster is enamored with potential.
There's both my private archives, which are just materials that I look at every day that inspire me, to, material projects that are in play.
There's a hardware store among these things, and there's an old knitting factory, and there's an upholstery shop. Instead of those things being forgotten about, those moments in the urban landscape, we'll be able to kind of pull those things out and play with them.
Everything is about collecting things that have spirit and history within them. His collecting is actually very sculptural too. It just feels like it's like a mounting. It's about mass. I really think he is quite brilliant in kind of making sculpture, making the sculptural performative.
Music expressed in the form described in the foregoing words is as natural to the American Negro as his breath.
Theaster Gates, for me, is one of the most extraordinary voices in the field of contemporary art. And I suppose I use the word voice as a play on words as well, because his voice is always ringing in my mind.
Hear him sing in his church. Hear him preach, moan, and give bravery in his sermon.
You got my number, man?
How you been?
Really good, bro.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk to you, though.
I'd love to.
I do have your number. Remember, Anthony Canty. I'm going to give you a call.
Send me a text, man. Y'all take care. Good to see you, bro. So Black Library is this project that I conceived of where I've taken all of the duplicate books that I own throughout my collections that are about the Black experience, and then using their titles, I start to stitch together these new poems. So I basically took 3,000 books. Some have multiples of 3 or 4. And alphabetized them and then divided them by size. Amazing Grace. In half-inch increments. That formed the basis of raw words that could become my poems. So this becomes Amazing Grace with Black Rage, the Breaker of Wind, and that becomes the beginning of a kind of poetry. And that maybe in a way these books are at the same time history and maybe their titles functioning as an index toward a new art form.
And I think that I'm just trying to, by stitching these books together, maybe create a new grand narrative. Maybe the accumulated narrative wouldn't have existed unless these things were stitched.
Theaster likes beautiful things, and he wants to make a beautiful place for beautiful things. And insofar as I could ever sum up the work, that's how I would do it. Beautiful place for beautiful things.
So I got a call from a reporter asking, what I would do with this Nasher Prize money, and I hadn't really thought about it. But I've just moved a printing press from Boswell, Indiana. And the press stopped being active in 2002, but the owner, Cecil, has kept the equipment in the best condition. So I decided that I would use the resources from the Nasher to build this press, this imprint that we call Black Madonna Press. I love this idea that we could be a press that's dedicated to artist books, that I could explore some of that. There's just a small and simple practice that I'd like to observe. It seems as the projects get bigger, my desire to just do small things increases. And I think the press will be a big thing that allows me to do small, quiet things. And I feel thankful for the prize, but also thankful for this moment where sculpture feels bigger than it has ever. And maybe the winners of prizes more expansive than ever. I feel really honored to be a part of that number.